Hello everyone. In the little girl's innocent smile, Diep saw a reflection of James, the warmth, the gentleness, the quiet strength that once held her hand through every storm. Though he is far away, his presence lingers in her heart, reminding her that love can live on in the smallest, most tender moments. The night was quiet, yet Diep's heart carried the echoes of 1,000 thoughts. Life had not been gentle with her. She had once lived simply, waking early to tend the garden, selling vegetables at the market, dreaming of a peace untouched by storms. But everything had changed the day she opened her door to a child little Nee, with her wide eyes that carried both sorrow and hope. At first, Diep feared she could not shoulder the responsibility. James, the man who had given her both love and worry, was far away, consumed by battles she could neither see nor understand. She stood alone, holding a fragile hand that trembled at the world's cruelty. Yet when Nee smiled, something inside Diep shifted. That smile, innocent, untainted by betrayal, lit a warmth that no darkness could extinguish. In that smile, she saw a reflection of James. It was not merely the curve of the lips or the brightness in the child's eyes. It was the strength hidden beneath gentleness, the kind of resilience James always carried when the world tried to break him. Diep's heart trembled, realizing that even in his absence, James was present. His figure lived in her memories, his words lingered in her silence, and now his strength shone through the little girl who needed her. Every day, as Diep guided Nee through simple routines, teaching her to wash her hands before meals, helping her braid her hair, telling her bedtime stories, she began to see the meaning of love unfold in unexpected ways. Love was not just waiting for James's return. Love was choosing to nurture, to protect, and to build something lasting even when the future was uncertain. Still, loneliness often wrapped around her in the late hours. She would sit by the window, looking at the stars, wondering where James was, if he thought of her, if he still dreamed of the life they once whispered about. And when those doubts threatened to break her, Nee's laughter pulled her back. The child's joy became her anchor. In every smile, in every innocent gesture, Diep found courage. For James, far away in his world of negotiations and betrayals, it was Nee's existence that slowly reached him through Diep's letters and quiet words over the phone. He began to realize that what he fought for was not just the survival of his company, but the fragile happiness waiting for him at home. Each time Diep spoke of Nee's smile, James felt as if she was sending him a piece of light in the middle of his darkest hours. Diep did not know what the future would bring. She only knew that when she looked at Nee, she saw more than a child saved by compassion. She saw hope, she saw resilience, and in the depth of that smile, she saw James, the man she loved, the man she longed for, and the man she believed would one day return. And so, in the quiet house where love and fear mingled, Diep whispered a promise to herself to keep going, to keep loving, and to never let the storms of life take away the light that James had once lit in her heart. Far away from Diep's small home, James sat in the corner of a dimly lit office. The weight of documents, contracts, and losses surrounded him like invisible chains. For months, he had lived with the bitterness of betrayal, fighting enemies who wanted to see him fall. Every decision felt like a battlefield, and every night ended with exhaustion pressing against his chest. Yet, amid the noise of business and chaos, Diep's voice lingered in his ears. She often spoke softly over the phone, telling him about the little girl. She smiled today when I taught her how to write her name, Diep had said one evening. James had fallen silent then, holding back the ache in his throat. He had never met the child, but in her laughter, he could hear the echoes of something he thought he had lost: innocence, hope, a future worth fighting for. At first, James told himself he could not return yet. There were still battles to win, debts to pay, enemies to expose. But the more he tried to bury himself in work, the more the thought of Diep and Diep pulled at his heart. The image of Diep, patiently teaching a child to live, to love, to trust again, haunted him. It reminded him of what truly mattered. One sleepless night, he opened his drawer and found a small photograph, Diep smiling under the sunlight, taken long before his world had started to crumble. He pressed the photo against his chest and whispered, "Wait for me." It was then that he realized the empire he was trying to protect meant nothing without someone to share it with. James began to make choices differently. He stopped chasing every battle and started focusing on the war that mattered, protecting the future with Diep. Slowly, piece by piece, he untangled himself from the endless cycle of pride and revenge. He knew it was time to go home. When he finally stepped off the car in front of Diep's modest house, the scent of fresh earth and vegetables reached him. His heart raced like it had the first time he confessed his feelings to her. He knocked, and the door opened. There she was, to Diep, holding Diep in her arms. The child looked at him shyly, then gave a small smile. James froze, breath caught in his chest. In that smile, he saw not only innocence, but also a reflection of himself, his strength, his flaws, his longing. And when he lifted his eyes, Diep was there, watching him with tears trembling in her gaze. In that quiet, unspoken moment, James knew he had been lost, but Diep and the little girl were his way back. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air between them was heavy, yet tender, as if the world itself had paused to listen. James felt his throat tighten. He wanted to say 1,000 words, apologies for his absence, explanations for his silence, promises for the future, but nothing seemed enough. To Diep, her arms still around me, finally broke the silence. "You came back," she whispered, her voice trembling between disbelief and relief. James stepped forward, his eyes locked on hers. "I should never have left," he said, his tone raw and unguarded. "But I had to fight battles that would have destroyed us all. And through every long night, it was you I thought of, you, and the little girl whose smile reached me even in the darkest places." Diep squirmed gently in Diep's arms, her wide eyes staring at James with innocent curiosity. Then, with a courage that surprised them both, she stretched out her small hand toward him. "Are you the one Diep always talks about?" she asked softly. James felt something in his chest break open. He knelt down, lowering himself to her level, and took her hand with trembling fingers. "Yes," he whispered, "I am. And I promise from this moment, I will be here for you, for both of you." Diep's tears finally spilled, running silently down her cheeks. For so long, she had carried the burden alone, raising Diep, protecting her, working tirelessly to keep a simple life afloat. She had hoped James would return, but doubt had often overshadowed her faith. Now, standing before her, he wasn't just a powerful CEO. He was the man she had waited for, the man who had chosen love over pride. The three of them stayed there, gathered in the doorway, their hearts quietly knitting together. James rose, placing a gentle hand on Diep's shoulder. "I don't have all the answers yet," he admitted, "but I know this, my place is here, with you, with her, with us." Diep nodded, unable to form words, only tightening her embrace around Diep, and Diep, sensing the shift in the air, giggled softly, the sound so pure it carried into the evening like a promise of tomorrow. For the first time in a long while, James felt peace, not the peace of a battle won, but the peace of coming home. In the story of James, to Diep, and little Diep, there lies a lesson deeper than love and reunion. It is about the choices that shape our lives and the bonds that give them meaning. James was a man of power, wealth, and responsibility, He fought battles in the corporate world, believing that victory and survival in business would secure his future. Yet, in the end, he discovered that success meant little when it was not shared with those he loved. Diep, on the other hand, lived with simplicity and quiet strength. She chose to open her heart and adopt a child when no one expected her to, proving that true love is not measured by possessions, but by courage and sacrifice. The little girl, Nee, became the unexpected bridge that connected them. In her smile, James saw a reflection of hope. In her innocence, Diep found strength to continue even in hardship. And in her laughter, they both found a reason to stay, to rebuild, and to love without condition. This teaches us that sometimes the greatest victories are not in business, wealth, or pride, but in the relationships we nurture and the lives we touch. We may lose battles in the outside world, but if we hold on to love, compassion, and faith, we can always find our way home. The story reminds us that forgiveness is stronger than regret, and that the true measure of success is not what we build with our hands, but what we carry in our hearts. Love often shows itself in the quietest of ways. Diep's willingness to raise little Nee, even without James by her side, reminds us that love is not just a feeling but a choice. She chose patience over despair, compassion over fear, and hope over loneliness. Her decision to care for Nee taught that sometimes the bravest act is to give without knowing if anything will be returned. James's journey, too, carries a message. He realized that true strength is not only found in winning external battles, but in admitting vulnerability. By returning to Diep, by kneeling down to hold Nee's hand, he showed that humility and love are far greater than pride and power. It is never too late to return, to mend, and to begin again. And from Nee, the little girl who once stood alone and frightened in a crowded street, we learn that even the smallest presence can change the course of lives. Her laughter, her innocence, and her simple trust became the light that healed wounds and drew two hearts back together. And from Nee, the little girl who once stood alone and frightened in a crowded street, we learn that even the smallest presence can change the course of lives. Her laughter, her innocence, and her simple trust became the light that healed wounds and drew two hearts back together. To love is to risk, to forgive is to heal, and to stay true to the people who matter is to find a happiness that no storm can take away.